So just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at and kind of bring you up to speed. What we want to cover today. First of all, how did we get here? Well, 12 weeks ago I started a class and read 2 books that had to do with brain research and how it applies to education. One of them I have over here is called How the Brain Learns by David Sousa. And this is a very practical book, and part of our professional development going forward will be some ideas from this book. That book does a good job of taking brain research and saying, here's what the research says, and based on this, here are some practical things you can do in the classroom. So we're going to incorporate that into some of what we do going forward. There's another book we read called The Shallows. It's about what the internet's doing to our brain. And it's really about how not technology in general, but specifically about the way we read on the internet and the way the internet's designed to help us read broad as opposed to read deep. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. And really today is just going to be an overview. I know that I spent 12 weeks doing that. We went to a conference and spent collectively 96 hours listening to information on brain research. Well, that's a lot of information that we have that you guys are all in various stages. Some of you might not have heard very much about brain research. Some of you may have read stuff on your own or even taken classes. Maybe some of you did your master's degree, maybe you had a class on that. Or maybe you're just interested in it. But we're kind of all at different places. So we're trying to bring everybody up, not necessarily to the same level, but at least to an understanding of what we're talking about. So today is really kind of an overview. We are not going to get in very deep in a lot of things, and we're not going to give you a lot of practical applications today. But I do want to get you an idea of where we're at, where we're coming from, why we're doing it, and where we're headed. And each person that went to the conference is going to share just a few minutes of what they did. The theme of the conference was using brain science to engage attention in a distracted world. We live in a distracted world. You guys see that with your students, and some of you experienced it yourself on a regular basis. So what does the brain science research have to say about how we can engage students maybe differently, maybe in a better way, and maybe even help us? Bill has already said that. You know, what about teachers who are distracted and stressed and wired? And a lot of this will help us as well, I believe. So the first question is, what do you know? Well, like I said, we're all at a million different places. So why don't you throw a few things out to me that you either know or think you know about brain research, or what have you heard or learned in the past?
My brain is creative, my brain is logic.
Okay, 2 different sides of the brain, one for logic, one for creativity.
Nutrition is important for brain function.
Okay, nutrition important in brain function.
Sleep.
Sleep is important.
Nobody really multitasks.
Okay, a fascinating chapter on multitasking, and I'm going to mention that briefly today. And then we'll go in more depth later on.
Brain needs some downtime to assimilate information.
Okay, a lot of information on moving things from short-term to long-term memory, and what that takes. All right, very good. We'll touch on, actually all the things you mentioned, we'll touch on at some point in time, whether it's today or in future weeks. Now, first of all, each person is going to come and share maybe about 5 minutes of something they learned, and then, like I said, we're going to get more depth later. And then at the end of that, at the end of each person's sharing, I'm going to share kind of some overviews of the whole conference. It's hard to take all that information and package it into one short presentation, but there were some things that we noticed through conversations of what each session was about, and then keynote sessions, and certain themes kept coming up over and over and over again. So I want to touch on those big themes as well. So, who's first?
I can go.
Okay. Frank will go first. You have to come up in front.
All right. So while we were at the conference, each of us went to different sessions, and we kind of stuck, at least from my understanding, we all kind of stuck with pretty similar themes in a lot of them. And so it enabled each of us to speak to a different element of brain research or a different way of incorporating it into the classroom. Mine is on executive function and engaging focus or attention. So some of the simple skills that students use of just organization, just time management, getting your papers ready for class, and using those as ways of getting students focused. How can you do the little things that just help students better function in the classroom so they're not all over the place when they come in? Because I have 2 classes of 7th graders, both are 31 students, and so they're just all over the place when they come in, and getting just a wide variety of students, from those who are very organized and come in and sit down and are ready to go, and other students who are more worried about telling me that the Eagles lost yesterday than getting ready for class. And so how do we get those students organized and ready to go? I want to write 3 themes from my focus up here. One is, I phrased this myself, and you'll also see where my handwriting is. Intentionally, there's 2009. Intentionally engaging focus. That's kind of how I summarized what we learned about in one of my sessions. And the idea that there are simple things you can do to actively get students engaged and focused from the moment they come in. And it's not just a matter of getting them organized, but it also gets their brains functioning to a level where they're much better prepared for the activities and assignments you have them do in class when they do certain things to come in. And it's not just when you come in. That was a big one that I learned about, but it's also simple things you do throughout the day. So that's one part that I'll share about. 2 was, I have 6, I don't have these, but there are 6 theories of boredom that I'm going to share. And this will be my focus when we do some of those professional development later on in 2015. 6 theories of boredom. And I found these really interesting because there are 6 different academic ideas on maybe why boredom occurs, and nobody knows this is the one reason, but all of these combined are probably valid reasons, and there's different strategies that we picked up at the conference for how do you engage a student if they're showing these symptoms of boredom. And that ranges from like emotional disinterest to being stressed and different things like that. And then my third point that I want to share quickly is 2 strategies that we can use, that I've used in my classroom so far to help engage some of the students and the issues that they're facing when they come in. So 2 things under number 1. One is the idea of mindfulness, and I'm sure you'll hear this throughout today and over the next couple of months. But being mindful and being aware of just how where you're at when you come into the room and how you're doing in terms of being organized and some of the skills you have. And even just stopping, slowing down, and saying, okay. The idea of metacognition, of practicing thinking about how you're thinking. Am I prepared for right now? Calming down, getting ready for class, and not just coming in and just being like, what's going on? But getting students to stop and practice that. And then also intentional teaching strategies. What are some things that we can do from the start? 3 of, and again, I'm going to go into all of these with my session in the coming months, but cueing behaviors. And I think a lot of these are things we do already, but we don't know that they're tied to brain research, but a cueing behavior. So music or sound that you play that when they hear this, okay, they're supposed to perform this task. Get out your binder, get back to your seat, finish up whatever you're doing is this sound. So different sounds or different things like that was one idea that was talked about. Time orientation, so some students don't always understand what 10 minutes of time looks like in terms of accomplishing something. So there's a really neat tool that they showed us in one of our sessions, which was a time timer is what he called it. And it's a pie chart, and you can change it for the percentage of an hour. So what would 10 minutes look like in a pie chart of an hour? And they can see, okay, this is not that long of a time. I need to accomplish this pretty quickly, as opposed to 30 minutes. So some of those things that you can do to help them orient their time. And then brain exercises, which I'm going to share for my 2 strategies at the end here. Okay, so those are all different ways that we can help to guide students and get them to be functioning better, just the simple little things we do. And I found that I do some of these things, but don't always maybe do them appropriately or didn't know that they would help them, help the students with their cognitive function. So when I use them appropriately, I found that they'll actually function a little bit better and be more effective. Regards to the 6 theories of boredom, I've noticed that, in the past week and a half of class, I guess week and a day now, that there are a lot of different reasons for boredom. As I look around and if I see one student starting to put their head down, or one student is looking for 5 minutes in the wrong direction, and I start to think through, all right, what might be the cause? What might be one of the theories for why the student is going that way? And maybe not necessarily blaming them as they just don't care about me or my class, but there's something going on kind of behind the scene that is causing them to go, somewhere else and think about something else. So I found them very enlightening, just in terms of just understanding what goes on in the classroom. And so I'm looking forward to sharing those with you, and then also giving some practical responses you can do when you see this happening. Here's some things that you can work on to help get that student focused back on class. Okay, and the 2 things that I've been working on in my class so far has been doing a brain exercise at the start, and not just to get them focused and in their seat, but also to help get them mentally prepared. And so one of the things that I was told at the conference was that we all do motivation or some type of anticipatory set at the beginning of class to get students engaged in today's lesson, connecting prior knowledge, whatever that may be, but we don't always do something that's kind of just easy and relaxing. Because sometimes they come in stressed from a prior class and they don't know what's going on, and they're already shut down because of what happened before. So giving them something simple and relaxing, not just, put your feet up and do whatever you want, but something that's just, non-stressful for them, helps to get them mentally, all right, I'm focused again, I did this, I can accomplish that, and now I can move on to the next thing. And so riddles was something that I was told is an easy way to do that. It gets them thinking, but it's just a simple joke or task they have to complete. And so I've been using Far Side cartoons in my class. I'll put it up on the board and say, explain the cartoon. This one's a little dark. I haven't used this one, but I thought it was appropriate since we're talking about brain research. And it's just a simple picture, maybe with some quotes or captions, and say, what's the punchline? What does the cartoon mean? And they love it. They get excited. They're like, are we doing I call it a thinker size. That's my little phrase for it. So are we doing our thinker size today? And I say, yeah, sure, we're doing it. And I'll pull up a cartoon or a riddle, and we'll start going. So they enjoy it. And I use it in social studies because it helps to engage with political cartoons. How do you use context clues to help you identify what's going on? And so these are practice not only for my social studies content, but also to get them focused and on task and just mentally prepared as we go in throughout the day. I find this is especially helpful in the morning, the first period, because they come in, they're just sitting there and they're about to fall asleep, but giving them something simple like this often will help get them going. So that's one thing, and today's that I used was this one here. This was a very popular Far Side cartoon, but the birthmark on the chest, the target, and saying, bummer of a birthmark, Alan. You'll see some students, they get it right away, others are kind of sitting there for a few minutes and they're trying to get it, but they really enjoy it, and they enjoy the fact that they get it too. The fact that when they see everybody else like, okay, they're getting it, and then, they're like, oh, okay, I get it now, and they really enjoy the fact that they're joining in. But some students, one student said, you're making this too much of a big deal, it's just a simple cartoon. All right, but not all of them, I guess, get so excited. But my last strategy was just physical movement. That physical movement helps to get students going and get their brain functioning with getting blood moving throughout the brain. And so one thing that I tried was an instructor at one of the sessions had us get up, and we had to go find elbow buddies. And I dreaded this, just like most students, but we had to go and touch elbows with somebody in the conference. And I thought about walking out when they did this, because I'm not doing this, but it gets you moving. You have to get past the fear of meeting somebody new, and hopefully that's not the issue at this point of the year. But getting up, moving, kind of getting off of, if you're bored or not focused, they have to get up, think, do something different, touch elbows, and then I'll give them a question. All right, summarize, what does Amendment 1 of the Constitution talk about? and they'll talk about it with their partner. So doing something physical, getting them moving, I found that to be very effective when I've seen students just kind of draining, rather than just having them say, all right, summarize what we just talked about, and they're still just, but when they actually get up and move, they're actually a lot more responsive. So that's kind of what my focus was on. Those are some things I hope to share with you in the future, and 2 things that I've done so far that I thought were at least showing some results. So, there you go.
All right, so on that note, I know everyone's tired, so take like 20 seconds, do what you need to do, talk to the person next to you, stand up if you need to. I know the way our students, our first period is how we are at the end of the day. Is everyone still okay?
Everybody's too dark.
Okay.
Closing mind.
Well, you still have 10 seconds left, so do what you're going to do. All right, here we go. So as you have heard, we went to the Learning and the Brain Conference, and the subtitle of this particular one was Focused, Organized Minds, Using Brain Science to Engage Attention in a Distracted World. And these conferences happen several times throughout the year. There's always a different sub-theme, and they happen in different cities around the country. And the idea is to bring neuroscience with educators and have everybody sitting at the table talking. And there was a lot of comments this time that we also need education policymakers to start attending these conferences, because they're really the ones who are making change happen in our public school systems. So I went to this conference thinking that I was going to learn about the average teenage brain and how it's so distracted, and we know that, right? We could describe a lot of our students this way, that they're controlled by love and good feelings and bad feelings and hurt feelings. And what I actually found out was, first of all, it felt like we were drinking from a fire hydrant. There was just so much information that we were getting, and that's why we're going to take the rest of the year to try to give it to you in little pieces that are useful to you. But what I also found out is that really I am the person that's distracted, and I would say probably all of us in this room could say that we're distracted. And you can see here this woman at the desk, she's thinking of her cat at home, she's thinking of her Facebook page, her Twitter account, all of her different phones that she has, placing bids on things. It's Christmas time, you could have an Amazon box up there somewhere, her friends talking about her. And so really we're all distracted. It's not just a problem that our students have, it's a problem that we all have. That we as a society are distracted. And one thing that you're going to hear from Keith in just a minute is this big word that we kept hearing at the conference, neuroplasticity. And this is what stuck out to me in all of my different workshops and keynote speakers that I went to hear, is that your brain is a muscle. And it's always changing, contrary to what you might have heard many years ago. I remember hearing that, you know, you reach a certain age and that's it. The synapses are closed, you're done, you can't learn anything really big or new or different, but as we all know, that's not true. And it's been proven by neuroscientists that until you die, your brain is constantly changing and growing, and you have an effect on how it's changing and how it's growing. Okay, so many of you know that I like to run, so this really related to me, thinking of the brain as a muscle. Well, as a runner or as an athlete, you're always training, you're always looking for information, you're always training your body and sharpening your muscles to do the best that you can at your sport. And so we need to start thinking of the brain that way too, that you have to exercise your brain. And there's different things that you can do to maximize what you remember and to help teach your students in a way that they're going to remember the things that you say without spending too much time or effort remembering it. So if you're teaching in a way that's using some of the science that's coming out of neuroscience, your students are going to be able to remember a lot more with a lot less effort. There was a whole session called Study Less, Learn More. So I'm going to be talking with you about that. So where are we going? When you hear from me in the future, these are some of the topics we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about stress in the teenage brain and how cortisol levels in teenagers today are higher than they have been at any other point in history, including the Depression and World War II, and what's causing that. We're going to talk about dopamine. That's the drug that all teenagers like, and your own body makes it. You don't have to take a hit from anywhere. We're going to talk about something called a hyperactive amygdala, which can be caused by these things. And when you have a hyperactive amygdala, it's like a fire alarm in your brain, and everything else stops until it's taken care of. We're going to talk about how we can help our students achieve a balance of rest and activity, and how we ourselves can achieve a balance of rest and activity, because they're going to feed off of and learn what we're doing. We're going to talk about technology and how to use it better. We're going to talk about something called flow, which sort of uses all of these things and teaches your brain to work at its maximum level that's comfortable for it. We're going to talk about something called mindfulness, which is being aware of what you're doing and what you're thinking. And lastly, we're going to address some myths. Two of the biggest ones are multitasking, you can't do it, and learning styles and multiple intelligence. I know that that's a sticky one for some people, but it's actually never been proven to be true that you learn in one way better than the other. And so that's where we're going to be going in the future. And that's all I have to say.
Where we're going to go. I focused on the reading workshops, the acquisition of reading, and then on executive functioning, helping ADHD students in particular be more organized and methods to work for that. A lot of the reading focus was done by Dr. Christodoula, who works for Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital. And her research has been on how reading is affecting student learning, and particularly dyslexia, where they're learning about dyslexia and the brain. Our brains start out using the frontal cortex as we read, and as students acquire higher level reading abilities, that moves back, and it eventually settles on the left-hand side of the brain. It starts out using both, but our brains will focus on the left-hand side as we become more mature readers. Under the age of 10, we're trying to teach children to learn to read. After the age of 10, we want them to read to learn. And when children are experiencing reading difficulties, it inhibits their learning in every single one of our subject areas. We see particular reading difficulties and loss over summer among lower socioeconomic groups. And the summer break causes students to lose a tremendous amount. One of the researchers that they did, Dr. Christodoula worked with a brain group, and they brought in a group of students from the surrounding area, lower socioeconomics, and they spent just concentrated reading time with one group, and those students just maintained where they were when school got out. The other group that they didn't spend that time with dropped tremendously. It wasn't that the one group they were working intensively, and this is 100 hours of reading instruction, elevated, they just maintained, but the other group dropped off tremendously. And you can imagine the disparity that grows every year as we have students, and fortunately in our school we don't have a lot of students that would fall into the group where they're not reading at home or having to read at home, but those students who are not reading at home are losing tremendous amounts of ability level over the summer. The other thing they talked about was they did brain research on students who had had their left hemisphere removed for perhaps tremendous seizure problems and things like that. And eventually, your right hemisphere does take over those reading function abilities. They're testing children as young as 4 months. One of the pediatric neuroscientists that I worked with, or that spoke, she talked about the reading that they're looking at, how children are acquiring language even as young as 4 months to 18 months. They're putting them in these, they call them functional fMRIs, functional MRIs, where they're looking at the brain where it lights up as time goes on. Dyslexia in particular was one of the focuses, and the genetics in that. This is a genetic issue. You're 50% more likely to have it if one of your parents has it. And twins are very likely to have it. They do studies to see if twins also connect, and they do. So it's a genetic issue, but reading training can cause it as they showed you the brain plasticity. We can reconnect that. It can be taught. They can learn better strategies, and much like you did maybe when you were reading to your children. You know, you start out with looking at the words, and they may not see every word, but you're asking them, show me where the blue boat is on the page, show me where the bird is on the page, and you're making connections in other ways. And this is how kids are learning word recognition. They're learning to predict through what pictures are there. So all of these things are important strategies as you're teaching reading with kids. And the more they read, the better they read. And but you have to teach them the steps to reading as well, through word comprehension, sight word recognition, predicting, and things like that. So we'll talk more about that as time goes on too.
Okay, they all three mentioned things I wanted to comment on. So for Greg's, I'll comment the far side you put up there with the bummer of a birthmark out. in my senior yearbook, next to my name was that quote, because I walked around saying that with my friend all the time, so that takes me back to high school. Okay, moving on. To a few of the mindfulness. I had never heard of mindfulness going to this conference, and those of you that know me know that this is emotional things are not me. I'm not a very emotional person. And when I was reading about it and I was getting in there, I thought, man, this is out of my comfort zone. But they all took the good three conferences, and I was stuck with mindfulness. So I got in there, and Greg's in a session where every 7 minutes they have to get up and touch elbows or high five or roll on the floor, and we're in the room next to them, and there's all this commotion going on, and I'm going, I wish I was over there. And we're in a room where we're completely still and silent and thinking about what we're thinking. Very different, interesting atmosphere. But I was very glad I went when it was all said and done, because it really exposed me to an area of the brain research that I'd never thought about before, other than in a spiritual context, which I'll mention in a minute. Since that time, the idea of mindfulness has come up so many times in things I've read and seen, and I've been shocked. Like this brought me today, ASCD, their education update for this month. The front page, the first article is The Mindful Educator. It's a whole article on mindfulness and what they're doing in education with mindfulness. I read an article as soon as I got back about a school in Washington that it's a mindful school, and they actually have one period every day that's just teaching about mindfulness. And why this is significant is because the research is showing that students or people, anyone who practices this mindfulness, which can relate to meditation, but it's not really meditation in and of itself. If they practice this regularly, every day for a period of time, they're showing that the brain is changing in a positive way. And that's something that they did not expect to happen necessarily. So stress is another issue, as mentioned several times. Students are more stressed than ever, and we have to bring down that stress. And one way we bring down that stress is through this idea of mindfulness. And there's so many activities that can be 1 to 2 minutes that you can use to help students calm down and be de-stressed a little bit. And what's important about that is they walk into you walk into school every day, and you know what's going on in your life, and sometimes you need to de-stress, or we need to de-stress. Kids are walking in the room and you have no idea what just happened in the hallway, whether they just got knocked over and somebody didn't help them up, or someone slammed a locker and their finger was in it, or their boyfriend or girlfriend just broke up with them, or nothing happened and they just walked in and they still don't know what was going on. They're all in different stages, and we know that. And because when they're stressed, you mentioned cortisol being produced, our brains produce cortisol, and when you have high levels of that, it causes fogginess and an inability to concentrate and focus. So when our students are coming in stressed, it's not just the stress is bothering them, but what the brain is doing to them is causing them to not be able to focus in class. And you want them to care about whatever it is you're talking about, and they can't do that because physically they don't have the ability to do that. So part of what mindfulness does is help them to bring that level down so they can focus on what you're trying to talk about, because it's very important. Can you go back real quick?
Yes.
I appreciate you doing this. I don't have to get this screen all the time. We're going the wrong way, but that's all right. The prefrontal cortex, I want to mention that. That's where the executive function skills are located in the brain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive function skills. And that's something that's later developing in the brain. And it really doesn't develop in most people until they're 25 or 26 years old. So here we are with a bunch of middle schoolers running around with very little executive function skills in their prefrontal cortex, and we're expecting them to do incredibly organized things, and that's difficult for some of them. Executive function skills are things that have to do with being organized, being on top of things, being able to set goals and plan and strategize to be able to accomplish something. Some kids do it naturally. My daughter Olivia is more organized than anybody on the planet. She's got a calendar on her wall with all of her assignments that are coming up, and they're color-coded, and she's got sticky notes for what has to be done when, and she's got to accomplish all this before the Christmas break. And she is looking at colleges, and she's got this spreadsheet with every school she wants to go to, how much it costs, where it's located, what their majors are compared to what she wants to do, what GPA you have to get in, what SAT and ACT scores, and she's got to prioritize. All right, Carter Wynn, college? Yeah, that's a good idea. You know, and he ended up doing somehow. So they're very different in their, you know, hopefully his executive function skills will kick in before he graduates from college, but I'm not sure. So anyway, mindfulness has to do with a lot of the thinking about what you're thinking, and when I went into it, I was very skeptical about it, but I think there's some good takeaways there, and I'll tie together the biblical theme here in the end. So what are some big themes that we saw as we went to sessions, had some joint sessions, and then we had our own individual sessions? Then we would have time to eat together and talk about what we saw or what we heard. So here are the big themes. Neuroplasticity, she mentioned, the brain is changing. There's new connections forming, and that's very important because we are trying to get them to continue those connections. That's why so many of the activities we do are so important, because we're helping them to continue to develop the brain and not get stagnant. When they're not reading, that's why that's so significant that they read, and we encourage them to do that. So we'll talk more about each of these ideas later. I'm just touching on the themes right now. Mindfulness I just mentioned, and I'll talk some more about how to do that and give you some examples of that. And teaching students to focus. So just the idea that we can actually help teach them is very significant. Nature and activity are two things that help in this idea of focusing and being able to help students. Nature, just going outside and looking at nature help students to calm, help them to bring the stress down. Looking at art, certain art helps them, listening to certain kinds of music. Getting up and walking. One study had students getting up and walking just, I think, down the hall and then taking a test. And another group of students took the exact same test and didn't walk beforehand, and the students that performed that brief activity beforehand performed much better on the test, and they've seen that in several cases. Focus, daydreaming. We always want students to be focused on what we're doing in class and not daydream, but it's very important that they do have time to daydream, and we sometimes call it mind wandering, or this relaxed mode network, where our ability to just relax and be creative. This is where ideas come. This is where we sometimes solve problems, come up with solutions. When we have this time where we don't have to be focused on a specific thing. And that's a very important mode that we need to use more of, especially in schools. When we want them to solve problems, we want them to be creative and not always just be focused on a certain task. Multitasking, as it's mentioned, it can't really happen. And I'll give you some specific research on that later on. But basically, when you try to multitask, it actually affects your brain negatively. And with the chemicals that are being produced in your brain, when you try to multitask, it causes you to not be able to focus and not be able to concentrate. And actually, the best thing for you is to take one task, complete it, and then take a break. This is one class I'm taking, but I'm also taking another class where I had to write a long paper. And last night I was here writing a paper, and I took one section of the paper and I wrote for about an hour, and then I got up and I walked up and down the hall a couple times, sat down, went to the next section of the paper, wrote for an hour, got up, called home, talked to my kids, relaxed a little bit, went back and wrote the third section. That was over. I think I was able to write better and accomplish more than if I were to just try to do the whole thing. And I turned my phone off. I made sure my email wasn't on. There was no anybody could contact me. So I wasn't distracted constantly. She mentioned dopamine. Dopamine, your body naturally produces at certain times. When people take drugs, dopamine is produced. Actually, when your phone goes off, it's called novelty. When a novelty thing happens, your brain produces dopamine. When your phone goes off, your brain produces dopamine. That's one of the reasons that we train ourselves to constantly be looking at our phone. It's a novelty, and your brain's actually producing dopamine when it goes off and you look. So we have to train ourselves to disconnect, and I'll talk about technology as well. De-stress, I've kind of mentioned that already, the importance of doing that, and there's several different areas that are affected by that. The executive function skills I've mentioned briefly. There's some really interesting things. I'm going to give you some practical strategies, especially for ADHD students, in helping to teach them to be organized, not necessarily just be organized, but to be able to accomplish tasks. I'll just give you one example of that comes to mind. Students who come into the room and don't know where to get started. And they did something, this presenter shared an idea called Future Me, Present Me. And they take a student and keep them outside the room, and they say, all right, they take a picture of them with their iPad, and then they go in the room and set a picture at the desk. of that child, and then they go outside and they say, all right, future me is in there getting ready for math class. What do you think future me is doing right now? And the child will talk about all the things that they're probably doing to get ready for math class. So then you look at that and say, go be future me. And then they walk into the room and they have to think through the things they just talked about. They know what they have to do, but now that they've thought it through, they can go get ready for math class. And you have to do that regularly to help teach them to do that. There's another app where you can take a picture of a room, and you take a picture of the child and put them in that room, and they have to say, all right, when I go to the room, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go here, and they can actually see it on the app, and it helps them to visualize what they need to do when they enter the rooms. That tends to be more for elementary students, how they get ready for their day when they come in. But it's important that they visualize in space and time where they're going to be and when they're going to be there, if they're going to be more successful in that. So we'll get more detail on that in the future. Technology, we talked a lot about that. It's kind of interesting, because I'm in some sessions that are talking about how to use technology, other ones that are talking about how it's affecting our brain in a negative way. So we'll spend some time kind of balancing the two. How is it useful? But then also about disconnecting. One of the keynote sessions was by a lady who wrote a book called The Big Disconnect. And it was 8 practical ways that we need to disconnect from technology to be more beneficial, because kids they're engaged in technology, but so are their parents. And many times their parents are so engaged that it's turning the kids off and it's affecting relationships. So there are some of them are very practical ways to step back in. And some of them are common sense, and you're probably already doing them with your families, but some of them I hadn't thought of before. So we'll hit those. Now I want to mention 2 things. What's interesting to me, and it's no surprise to any of us, the things that they're finding in brain research support what Scripture has told us for years. And I love that, this mindfulness, which relates to meditation and being able to think. We know from Scripture that we're told to meditate on Scripture. We know that if we meditate, we found that not just is it important because the Bible says to, the brain research shows that when we meditate, our brain is actually, it's a healthy thing for the brain. So what God has told us to do for thousands of years is healthy for the brain, and research is finally figuring that out. Rest and vacation. Being able, not just resting and not doing anything, but taking vacation. We know from Scripture we're told to rest. But now brain research is showing how important it is for your brain to disconnect and not just go on vacation with your family, but to get away from technology and certain things. And it actually is healthy for your brain because of what's happening in the cortisol and dopamine, the things that are being produced, the chemicals that are being produced in your brain, break from things and rest to help rejuvenate your brain. So there were other areas where there's connections there, but I think it's so cool that in a conference that's very secular and they're just talking about how the brain's still evolving over time, where we can see things that brain scientists are now figuring out through brain research that the Bible has told us for years, and tie those 2 things together. And I think it's important, not that just that we take some of these things that we'll be learning and put them into practice, but some of them, I think it's important that kids understand why we're doing it. When we talk about mindfulness, to help them understand why do we need to be mindful, and why are we doing this? Why are we doing this activity? There was one app that they shared that's good for executive function skills for problem solving. It's called Amazing Alex. So I downloaded it. And you have to, it'll show you when you go to the app, you take this ball and you have to get it to go to a certain point. You have to build bridges and you have to put in pipes and tubes to get this ball to go where you want it to go. And it's hard to do the first time. So you put in, you move platforms and you figure it out and you press a button and the ball falls and it ends up either where it's supposed to go or not where it's supposed to go. So I had my daughter do it. And I had Ellie do it. And she starts doing this and she goes, Dad, this is like problem solving. I said, exactly. Thank you, guinea pig. That's why you're doing this. Because it really does help them to focus on something in a fun, engaging way. Helps them to build those executive function skills because they're problem solving. You're thinking through, all right, this worked, but over here it didn't work. So if it didn't work, what do I have to do differently? And they're playing a game which is fun to them, yet they're also doing some critical thinking, problem solving, and developing those skills that we want them to develop. So a lot of cool things that are becoming. I thank you for your time today. Any questions as we started? All right, when we come back in January, I mentioned we're not going to take the whole day. We're just going to take a portion of that first day back do one session, and we'll do one each month, and then I'll follow up. I'm gonna go into classrooms and look for these sorts of things. Try to incorporate them in my classroom. If you have a specific time you're trying something, you can just let me know. All right, thank you very much for your time, I appreciate it.